Hey, Braille Watson reporting to you live from home where the schooling happens. We are coming up on the end of our Church Forsaken series. One tear falling from the face, one tear. Legacy thinks it's funny. She laughs at people's pants, what she does. Well, we're coming to the end of this series. We only have 2 weeks left, and then we'll be kicking into something different, probably moving back into our midweek major in the minor series. But hey, thank you so much for joining us for Church Forsaken. We got 2 weeks left. So if you're just now joining us, we want to invite you to go to walkingtowardslove.com. That's walkingtowardslove.com and download the curriculum that goes along with these videos. This is all about helping us learn how to really steward well the place where Christ has placed us, so that we can be salt and light to the community around us and learn how to love our neighbors and love our enemies into friends. So be blessed. I hope you enjoy this week's Church Forsaken. I believe this week we've got Dean and Tyler kicking us off again with our worship. So enjoy that time and let's get into this word.
Jeremiah 29:7 says, "Seek the peace and welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." This is what practice 6 is trying to help us realize, that we have to remind one another of our collective power. Yes, the church is God's chosen change agent for the world. However, we cannot do it alone. We must be willing to partner with anyone who's looking for total flourishing in neglected neighborhoods all over the world, right? So that could be elected officials, that can be first responders, that can be community organizations, residents. Whoever is looking for the flourishing of your neighborhood or your city, we as the church must work together. This is why God says, pray to the Lord on its behalf. That's why it says that in its welfare, you'll find your welfare. So practice 6 of Church Forsaken says, remind one another of our collective power. For when we come together, we can transform neighborhoods all over the world. So I ask you, will you work together to see the flourishing that God desires for the world?
Our church never does anything unless we've had interaction with our entire community about how it's going to happen. So we have a food cooperative because our neighbors said, we don't need another food pantry in the neighborhood. We have tons of those. I need a place where I can shop for fresh fruits and vegetables. So we take turns every weekend going to harvest and get things. And this past summer, we began planting our own garden. That's a whole nother conversation. We forced the city to start giving us lots in our neighborhood for $1 if we own property on them. Now it's called the large lot program. So one of our co-op members bought a large lot and we're opening our own garden that feeds the co-op, right? But I can't do that by myself, and so we need to do it together.
What I have determined to do in my life and what I'm hoping to encourage us to do as we move forward is to be people who are building things, not just tearing stuff down. Okay? Because it's true. We have to tear down systemic injustice. We have to tear down white supremacy. We have to tear down the system that Andy so eloquently laid out for us. But if we tear down stuff without knowing what we're building, we're left with vacant land. And I know all about what it is to live in a community where they tear it down and don't never build it up. And so here's my push for us. This is my call to us, that we must be a people who are building our collective voices. If we spend so much time complaining about what needs to be torn down and never get together in circles like this to talk about what we're going to build, we will never change anything. But there's another need. There's a need for us to create alliances. Not just come to gatherings and understand that each other have issues. But we have to begin to create alliances that seek the liberation of all without the oppression of any. Right? The way Andy said it earlier was, she said that what we have to do is make sure that one group's model of liberation does not become the model of oppression for another group. The only way we can do that is if we begin to build, recognizing that if we only build with our racial or ethnic group in mind, we are doomed to oppress someone else. So how do we build, knowing that we can also tear down another group as we build? So I said we have to focus on the kind of building we're going to do. So this was right up my alley. A lot of y'all may not know this, but I graduated from Tuskegee University in Tuskegee, Alabama, with a degree in architecture. There are some specific questions that you have to ask yourself if you're going to be a builder, not just someone who's in the business of destroying. It's different work, right? If you've ever worked in construction or seen construction, or you've ever had to remodel something, it's one thing to do the demolition. I mean, come on now, we people of color, we've all seen missions groups come through. So it don't really matter who you get to do the demolition, right? We just bring all your volunteers, put on masks, gloves, and let's just put holes in walls, because we're just tearing it down. But if you've ever had to work with one of those white missions groups that's coming in for them to actually do some building, what you learn is it's more work to bring in folks from the outside who don't know how to build, even if you got more hands, than it is for you just to do the work with one or two people who are skilled. So when we're going to build, we have to be skilled in what we're building. So there's some questions you have to ask. First and foremost, you have to ask, what is the world we long to see? When was the last time you got together with a room full of black folk or Asian folk or Latino folk or native folk and just said, what is the world we long to see? Let's not complain about how the world is. Let's not complain about all the stuff we have to deal with. For once, let's just say, if the world was the way we wanted it to be, how would that world look? As an architect, I could ask that question. What is it that I want to put on this site? But the other question that I have to ask is, what will be the effect of what I put on this site on the world? And how is it going to affect other people? Right? When you begin to build, there's some things you have to think about. As an architect, I would begin by planning. I would look at the site, look at what I have to build on it, and figure out if this is a site that will hold what it is I want to build. Look at my surrounding. I have to look at the environment of the site. Can I build here? After asking that question, I ask, what kind of materials can I use that will actually work to build on this site? Can I use materials of everyone else around me, or do I need to use different materials based on how their buildings are holding up in this environment? Thirdly, I would ask, what is the structural plan to make sure that my building will stand years after it has been built? Do I only think about building it, or do I think about sustaining what I am building? The next thing I ask is, what is the purpose of what I'm building? Why did I build it? Because once I know the purpose, I know how I should design it. A famous architect, Louis Sullivan, said, form follows function. You don't build something that doesn't fit the purpose of why you built it. So when we begin to ask ourselves these questions, we begin to ask ourselves, what are we actually building? What materials do we need? Do we need the materials that we've gotten from the oppressor? Are we trying to build organizations that will actually benefit communities of color by using a structural organizational model made by white people that were not even in those communities? Will those materials hold up? Was that structurally sound? What was it? What was happening with their buildings using those materials? Do we have the same purpose? Do we want our buildings to look like theirs? We cannot just be dismantlers. We have to be ingenuitive builders. Coming up with new systems, new structures, new materials, new forms, because unless it's brand new, we will recreate what has been there. And what we find out is the master's house will never be destroyed by the master's tools. I was looking at Black Lives Matter, right? And Black Lives Matter will always show up at different people's organizing events or marches. So when the natives were fighting against the Dakota Access Pipeline, Black Lives Matter was there. In our city, when the issues of whether Chicago was going to remain a sanctuary city and all these other things, Black Lives Matter was right there. And then I started to see stuff pop up, like that there was actually a Native Lives Matter movement that began. And an Asian Lives Matter movement that began. And I went, that's interesting that when we came to your thing, we didn't usurp it and say, no, black lives don't want oil going through their land either. That's not what we did. We just joined. But here's what happened. When I saw these equitable alliances, I saw a change when I saw proximity change. As African Americans began to show up at their thing, what happened was it went from Native Lives Matter to, watch this, Natives for Black Lives. That in Oakland, after what happened with the shooting of Eric Garner, the Asians for Black Lives began to protest in front of the Oakland Police Department. What we recognize there is that people are forming equitable alliances that form mutual liberation. Now, if we're going to have mutual liberation, then what we're going to have to recognize is every time I organize, every time I protest, every time I work, it's not going to be for the benefit of my specific background. But it's going to be for the freedom of all, meaning that at this moment, I might have to step back for the purpose of moving forward another organization or another group. We have to form alliances that will begin to protect one another. And I'm guilty of it. I'm speaking to you as somebody who's been guilty of it. I'm saying, if you ain't black, I ain't for you. But if you only root for everyone black, we'll never be free. what I learned is those alliances happen when we actually change our proximity and relationship to one another, when we actually get closer to one another in community, when we actually begin to understand each other's story. Because in order for me to understand how I'm going to create mutual liberation and build something that's actually going to free us all, I have to understand your story. And you have to understand mine. In my community, that's 99% African American. But there's an organization in our community called the Resident Association of Greater Inglewood. What I love about the Resident Association is because it is one of the most galvanizing things we have in our community. So Rage came together and they talked to the pastors and said, we need your help because we're trying to deal with the issue of store owners in our community who are making money off of feeding us garbage. I was like, whoa, you know, that's a long-term problem. They said, don't worry, watch this. We've already had conversation with the Inner City Muslim Action Network. They are speaking to the owners of the stores, and we want to bring everyone to the table and come up with a common set of guidelines that will liberate us all. So we sat down together, the pastors in the neighborhood with the imams from the mosque in the neighborhood, and we sat down with the store owners and with the residents of the neighborhood, and we came up with the Corner Store Campaign. The Corner Store Campaign addresses the long history of injurious business practices, ingrained racial tensions, and unhealthy food options that typify many inner city corner stores. Since its launch, the campaign has focused on 4 critical goals. First, developing alternative business models for corner stores on Chicago's South Side. Secondly, using public policy to promote lasting change toward food justice. Thirdly, launching an education campaign that stresses the benefits of healthier lifestyles. We can't be telling them to put different stuff in the store and ain't nobody gonna buy it. And then lastly, healing racial tension between Muslim and or Arab store owners and their mostly black patrons. In other words, we got to sit down and say, if you won't serve this to your son, don't give it to mine. But you see, I could have either just created a plan that would liberate black folk and said, get all of them out of my neighborhood. No more liquor stores, no more Arab-owned stores. I don't want none of them in my neighborhood. Not recognizing that one of the main streams of upper mobility for people who have immigrated into the country is for them to own their own stores. But I don't want you to do it on the back of my people, but I still want you to be able to feed yours. How do we make mutual liberative practices? This is what I mean about building. Is this hard? Absolutely. We've been at it for 6 years. And guess what's still most prominent in my neighborhood? Flaming Hots and 40 ounces. But we won't stop. Because I cannot just build a model that's going to be liberative for my daughter and not think about the daughter of the store owner.